Hello and welcome back to Coast FC, the Canadian soccer podcast focused on all things CPO, Canadian Championship, and more. My name is Felipe Ojo.
And I'm Rice.
And today we are starting our 2024 year in review recaps, going over all of the 8 CPL teams in the month of December. And we're going to start out with the bottom 2 teams. We're going to work our way from bottom to top in this series, starting with the 2 teams that we're the closest to in Vancouver and Valour. So we're going to be going over some of the stats and facts from their 2024 seasons, what went right, what went wrong. There's a lot of things that went wrong, and what they need in 2025 to improve their fortunes and hopefully for both teams make the playoffs for the first time in their history. But before we dive into it, remember to follow us on all of our socials at Coast to Coast FC, as well as finding us on YouTube to see the visual side of the podcast. So we're going to start from the very bottom, going to the very top in this series. So that means that we're going to start with last place in the table. That is Valour FC. Mike, I'm sure that you'll have a lot to say about Valour and their season that they just had. But let's go over some of the stats from Valour's season in this past season. So they did finish, like I mentioned, in last place. They finished on 28 points, 2 points away from 7th place Vancouver FC. They finished the season with a record of 7, 7, and 14. You'll see that with a lot of these stats, 7 seems to be a magic number, but not in the best of ways. 7 wins, 7 draws, and 14 losses. It was their record. 5 wins at home, 2 draws, and 7 losses. Meanwhile, sort of reverse of that with only 2 wins, 5 draws, and still 7 losses away from home. So at least they were consistently losing home and away. They scored only 31 goals in the entirety of the season, which was the 7th best, aka second worst in the league. And similarly, they conceded 42 goals, which was one off worst. So they were finished, or joint worst, which means they finished technically 7th in that regard as well. Their top goal scorers were Jordan Swivel and Sean Hundall. Both had 7 goals come the end of the season. Semi Antonoglu, as we mentioned, we've talked a lot about, was their top assister with 7 assists, and of course the top assister in the entire league with that. And then I went over some of the more, I guess you could call them deeper stats from FootMob and SofaScore and stuff like that to kind of paint a more of a statistical picture of what their season was like. Funny enough, one of the biggest ones that I saw was they conceded the most penalties this season with 9 penalties. I think 2 more than second place. Only 7 of them were scored though, but they conceded the most by quite a long shot compared to some of the other teams that only conceded 2 or 3. Again, 7 being a magic number. They were 7th in pass accuracy percentage, 7th in big chances, 7th in clean sheets. They were 8th in average possession. They were the top in some regards. They were number 1 in clearances per match, number 2 in interceptions per match, number 2 in saves per match, and number 1 in fouls per match. So
they were doing a lot without the ball.
They were doing a lot without the ball, and they were doing a lot trying to defend their goal throughout the season, which is why, again, they're quite high in those defensive numbers. But just looking at the stats and from what you've seen throughout the season, what are your sort of initial thoughts on Valour as a whole in 2024?
Yeah, it was tough getting all those away games to kick off the season. The players had to try and gel on the go. A number of players had to be replaced, additions throughout the year as well. So it was never really. It's not the same kind of chaos as York were last season in 2023, but 2024 Valour was quite chaotic in its own little way of just just nothing seemed to be under control whatsoever.
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment of Valor's season. It kind of you really never knew what you were gonna get
Mm,
from a Valor match, except for maybe the fact that it was going to be nervy and it was going to be filled with surprises.
mm,
Um, but like there were some things that went well for Valor in
yeah,
2024, and so before we get to all of the negatives that happened,
yeah,
let's
it's
start with some
gonna
of the
be,
positives.
yeah,
Let's try to look at the bright side, the silver linings of their season. I think the number one thing that went right in their season was obviously in one particular player, and
mm,
that was in Temi Antonoglu. He was fantastic player for them. Night and day when he wasn't playing
yeah,
on what Valor could do, especially offensively and creatively. Got a Defender of the Year shout, got our votes for it as
mm.
well. And the fact that he even got in that short list shows how, crucial and integral he was to this Valor side. So, like, he was probably the brightest spot of Valor's season just with everything that he was able to do.
Yeah, I mean, going from losing Debrienne, who everyone would have wanted to stay, and going to Ottawa, to be able to replace him so well. Valour and Phil Santos seem to know left backs when it comes to identifying Debrienne, moving him into the left back spot, then bringing in Temi. The rest of the recruitment could well be considered questionable at best, but they've got that position nailed down. I
Yeah.
think they know what they're looking for there, and they know how to find them. So I mean, that was, yeah, and it was fantastic to see. It's great seeing like young players struggle, who I thought was on loan, which apparently was completely incorrect about. Who was obviously didn't make the mark in Toronto FC, and was able to move away and give a chance in the CPL. And it was really lucky for Valor that they were able to pick him up. Really, I think there were the other teams now, as that season went on, thinking, actually, yeah, we could have done with him. Like, why didn't we step up and try and bring him in sooner? How did he get? How did he find his way to Winnipeg?
Yeah, yeah, I'm sure a lot of teams would be asking themselves that,
Mm,
especially how great that he played, and he's been a known talent. I know people
mm,
that know of like from Toronto and Toronto who are close to Toronto scene know that he was a big talent in the twos and in and around the sort of Toronto C team, and we're quite sad to see
mm.
him go. I think obviously it was for the best now that he's had the opportunity to play more competitive senior games and strut his stuff. And yeah, I definitely think it'll be surprising if he sticks
Mm.
around for Valor next
Yeah,
season. Yeah, we'll see what happens. But he's definitely the brightest spot for the Winnipeg team in 2024. But also they got a couple of other additions, some late additions
yeah,
to the team that were actually quite impressive, especially considering the story behind them in Mla and Quemi, because they were both part of that team, the CSA Laurent team that upset Halifax in the
yeah.
Canadian Championship and went far, became the Cinderella story of this year's Canadian Championship. That Cinderella story got them their auditions to the CPL, and they made pretty good on them.
Definitely, they're great additions to them. It was, like we say, one of the, as the year went on, there's question marks about the team, about the way it's been set up, but kind of like how Vancouver did the year before, they've noticed where things have gone wrong. They noticed the mistakes they've made in their recruitment, and they identified some players that can come in, and really. Mla was a good, solid central midfield player to come in, and Quemi was just really made up for that big loss in Kean Williams injury, like someone who could run at players and just run at defenders, because he just did it every time he got the chance. Anytime the ball came out to him and he could isolate someone one-on-one, he went for it. And it just gave Valor something different going forward. They had, like you say, Swibble and Hundle, 7 goals each. They had players in the box. who could get on the end of something, but sometimes they were lacking that player that would just do something a little bit different to ask questions of defenses. And though it didn't always go right, it just gave them that difference, and it helped them in games to really at least compete a bit better.
Yeah, yeah, and I feel like, especially given how the season started, like we mentioned, the 7 games away. Who can forget the 7-0
Yeah.
absolute drubbing that they suffered to Atletico Ottawa?
Mm.
Like it looked like it was going to be the worst season on paper that Valor would ever suffered. But slowly with time, they were able to improve little by little to at least be a bit more competitive. And
Mm.
yeah, the additions of Blanc and Kwame made them a little bit more multidimensional in the attack, a little bit more dangerous, and it allowed them to have a bit more consistency in some regards in terms of the way that they wanted to sort of attack. And we saw that when
Mm.
they had all of their players on the pitch and when everyone was focused, you could see, even if it wasn't for full 90 minutes, for good swaths of the game, like like a actual conventional plan style of play that looked dangerous and looked
Mm.
effective, and it's what allowed them to get, some of the big wins that they managed to get throughout the season.
Yeah, I mean, swapping to that sort of 4-4-2. I mean, the back three at the beginning, opening game over in Vancouver went terribly, and they made some changes, and eventually going to this 4-4-2. Like, there's a lot, and we've said it about a number of these teams throughout the year, where you don't see what they're trying to be, and you don't see what they're working towards. Everything seems a work in progress, even like philosophy and style of play. And you did start to get an idea of what what Valour were trying to be come the end of the season. That sort of second half of the year, you can see, yeah, they're all working hard. You got players that, I mean, Diego Rizurasao was
Mm,
working hard as a right mid. You thought, and when he came in, he was this, free, give him a bit of a free roll and see what he can do. Creative on the ball, great feet, but he turned into a really hard working player. Jordan Faria as well, going in the wings, and they had these players that came in that sort of changed their approach throughout the year and fitted into this system. Yeah, they finished bottom of the league, and it wasn't foolproof. A lot of the time, that was doing too much. They were trying to maybe ask too much, and they were running out of gas come like the last 10, 15 minutes of games. And if they were staying in it, they were losing out. I mean, we're talking about Vancouver again, but losing to that last minute goal when Vancouver are down to 10 men in Valour.
mm.
Those things were happening at the end of games for them, and it was just, maybe being pushed a little bit too much in that style. But if that's what, if Phil Santos is back next year and that's what they want to focus on doing, at least they kind of know what they're working towards now, and you've got an off season to do it. You've got time to find the right players to fit in. You've got time to build up stamina, fitness amongst these players. And I mean, we did mention obviously the additions and Temi, but it was great to see Oheen back and really like
Yeah.
having like a great season, like being really integral to that team. It was great to watch that as well.
Yeah, for sure. I think, yeah, his return and obviously getting the captaincy and everything was a
Mm,
really nice moment for Valor, given his injury, his
yeah.
long-standing battle with injuries the last couple of years. For him to kind of make a full recovery and and like reinsert himself into the team and everything was really nice, and it was a nice little story for Valor throughout the season. And yeah, like we mentioned, there was like that one time like in August where they got like 2 wins and a draw, which doesn't sound like much, but for a team that lost the first 8 games straight in all competitions, that's a good little period. They showed that they can be competitive. That includes, a 2-1 win over Forge,
Mm,
which is, not an easy thing to do, especially when Forge were still hunting for the shield at that point in August. So like they've shown that on their day they can compete with even the best teams in the league. It's just about that consistency issue that they had. And I guess that
Yeah.
now we can use that as to transition to what went wrong in 2024. I mean, the biggest thing for Valor was just they couldn't see out results
No.
consistently. How many times were they leading a game or like either before the half or even after the half, and then they conceded and drew or even lost games? They were quite good at scoring early, but
Yeah.
then they didn't have the materials or the concentration or the maturity or the experience to see out those games, and they dropped so many points from winning positions.
Yeah, and like we say, I'm not sure if it's the fitness part, but they did struggle at the end of games. They were losing concentration, and these goals were going in. I don't know whether that's strictly like that they just weren't prepared, whether they weren't fit enough to do what they were being asked to do, or whether just some of these players just weren't good enough to be able to do that. You've some sort of key names, I think, that come up for a lot of criticism. Probably Chansopoulos at the back, like sometimes in the midfield, they could be a bit soft at times, and it's a lot of chasing around. But at times they weren't getting in the right positions. They weren't getting back and being sort of resolute. There was, as the game went on, they sort of chased players a little bit, and gaps were forming. So that's something that's hard to tell whether it's just the way that they were being coached and the way they were being asked. Or if, some of these players just weren't good enough for playing in that style of play. And good old Viscosi, he had an error in him, to say, like, to politely put it. He made some huge saves throughout the season. Like, shot stopping, like, at times was fantastic. But well, yeah, he was mad. He was absolutely mad. And if you're going to be defending a lot, if you are one of the weaker teams in the league, you want to at least be like have the knowledge of, okay, well, at least the goalie behind me is going to be like, I know what he's doing. But you never knew that.
It's very true. I feel like that's the big difference between like Valor and Vancouver, where like
Exactly.
Vancouver, you had the stability of knowing Callum Irving was behind you, and even if you got exposed, he would do his absolute best to
Yeah.
stop a goal, and that he did that constantly. Well, Viscosi, sometimes you were like, oh, that should be fine, and then it didn't, and then it was not fine, and then you're kind of left wondering why did that even happen in the first
Yeah.
place. Yeah, definitely erratic is a great word of putting it out. But yeah, it just felt like that. Yeah, they had a couple of bad moments defensively, heads dropped, and then it was hard for them to kind of bounce back. And even when they did have good starts, they couldn't really make good on them across the 90 minutes to sort of get those results. And obviously it's frustrating for the fans and for the players, but it must be super frustrating also for the coach
Yeah.
in Phil Dos Santos, because we know how much of a tactician he is and how meticulous he is in the way that he wants to set up his team and how he wants them to play. It's I know, even from my own personal amateur experience in coaching, when you set out a game plan and the players just completely lose the plot and you're just
Yeah.
standing there helpless on the sideline, must be extremely frustrating for Phil Dos Santos too, especially when his teams do have those good starts. To not be able to see out those games must be quite frustrating. And I guess now that can lead to the part of talking about what they might need in 2025. Now, obviously, especially for the teams towards the bottom of the table, this is sort of like the $1 million question of what do they need in 2025. The extended version of that question is, what do they need in 2025 to be able to make the playoffs? Because ultimately, that's the goal for, all of the teams, but especially for Valor and, as we will talk about later, Vancouver. So, biggest thing, and I'll hand this over to you, Mike. What do you think Valor need in 2025 to make the playoffs for the first time in their history?
I think they need to stick with the style of play they've finished the year on. You've got a few players confirmed coming back, a few players, quite a few players all being sort of negotiations, and we'll see where some of them go. But I think we've seen it with Halifax and Valour, and we've seen it with Vancouver. Lots of changes in styles of play throughout the year across those three teams, especially. And I think it's not surprising that we saw them struggle to reach the playoffs. They need to have an identity, and they need to build on it. They can't keep chopping and changing mid-season, buying new players and swapping the style again. I think what they were trying to do come the end of the year is something that a side like Valour could do, and it could become dangerous. They need to find the right players, identify those that don't fit that system, that can't perform in that system, and then try and find those players that can add on a little bit more. If Facineri and Mordekoulis come back, I think that's two decent centre backs, but they do need to get a better backup. They're not going to play every game. Big questions on goalkeeper as well. But then I thought Alacon was a great pickup. You've got Dante Campbell who can fit in there behind him when he's out and things like that. So there is a little bit of depth in this team, but it's just trying to find those areas where you need a bit more, and trying to find those ones where you can get players who are going to compete for 90 minutes of a game as well. It's basics that they need to work on this year this off season, just to really compete. And I mean, they may have to find a third star left back as well after these performances this year. You'd imagine interest is high.
Exactly, yeah, and it will be interesting, like you mentioned. There's a lot of potential for a lot of turnover once again for Valour. And actually, luckily enough, at the time of recording, all of the clubs have released their sort of end of season roster updates for the 2024 season, and few are as open as Valor's right now, because out of their entire roster, only five players have guaranteed contracts through 2025. No goalkeepers, no defenders. Only Resurxao, Mla, Sukunda, Hondo, and Keon Williams have the guaranteed contracts for 2025. They do have a lot of options, club options, for goalkeeper Viscosi, Alarcon, Temi Antonoglu, which I would feel like, unless he chooses to go to greener pastures, is a no-brainer. Dante Campo, another one that I feel like probably will stay unless he chooses a new adventure. Jordan Faria, Rafael Ohin, Binate, Kwemi, and Swibble. I would imagine that a lot of those players probably will have those options taken, and will be coming back, assuming that Dos Santos doesn't want a second revolution at Valor so soon after the first one at the end of 2023. So I'm thinking that, maybe Viscosi, depends on how erratic he wants his keepers to be. Definitely Antonoglu if he wants to stay. I think Alarcon is a great shout. Campbell as well. Yeah, I feel like he has to.
Yeah, he's important to the team as a whole, isn't he?
Faria, him and Ohin, so both of them. Faria was a good player for them.
I really like Binate. I really like. There's something about him where you can see there's potential there that could improve, and going into next year, it could be an even better player. That's going to be a good sort of squad player in a CPL team.
Yeah, exactly. So I think Benate, it's sort of a 50-50, but I would also like him to come back. Same with like Kwemi. I think Jordan Swibble is another one that, given top goal scorer Sean Hundal, you'll probably want him back. Depending, I guess, on the system that you want, if you want to continue the 2-striker system or not.
Yeah.
We'll see. But they also announced that they did not take club options for 3 players who you would imagine will not be coming back. Joe Hansen, which is fair enough. He was sort of a third choice forward option that never
Yeah, it
really got
wasn't
that much
involved.
game time. Chansopoulos, I think, yeah, he made one too many mistakes early
Mm.
on in the season for him to be a reliable defensive
Yeah,
option. And then Jordan Haynes, which a little bit surprising, but I guess,
it's just
I
not good
feel
enough.
yeah, I feel like he's run his course with Valor.
Yeah.
He was pretty decent for them a couple seasons ago, but
Mm.
now I feel like he hasn't done enough to kind of earn that, so not super surprising. Noah Verhoeven's loan is ending. The one from Atletico Ottawa. And then yeah, Facineri's U Sports contract has expired. Probably expecting him to get a new contract because he was
Yeah,
he
was
was
good.
really good coming
Mm.
into the
Seemed
center
to
back.
fit well with Mordekudus if he comes back. But yeah, we'll.
Yeah, exactly. You would if they keep Mordekudus because as well Mordekudus, Muran Siranwa, Marcelo Polisi, and Juan Pablo Sanchez, all of their contracts expire at the end of this year. So it really depends on how much stability I think uh, Phil Santos wants for
Mm.
Valor because I think a good chunk of those players you probably would want to return, if anything, to be depth pieces if you want to improve the squad. Especially players like Mordekudis, like Dante Campo, like Binate, Swivel, even maybe Juan Pablo Sanchez. Like these are players that probably maybe shouldn't be starters if you want to be a playoff
Mm.
side, but good depth pieces. And
Yeah,
I'm curious to see how far Valor and the Santos want to go into making a new squad and having to redo all of the things that
yeah.
they had to do at the beginning of last season.
I think I mean you talked to I think you've talked to anyone other than Patrice Geyser last year. Uh, Changing an entire squad is a headache. And it just throws up way too many variables going into a season.
Yeah, exactly. So it will be interesting to see what happens in this off season with Valor. I think especially with the growing discontent in the fan base, especially
Mm.
those that are consistently going to games, at the fact that Valor sort of haven't really shown all that much ambition in the league so far compared to their other competitors, in which bar Edmonton that no longer exists, every other team except for Vancouver, but they just joined last year, has made the playoffs
Yeah.
and has shown a little bit more ambition than them. I think it's crucial for them to make sure that they get their decisions right.
Mm.
They have a bit more of a long term plan because it does feel like a lot of decisions that not only they make this year, but like that they've made in the last few years, if not since the beginning, is very kind of short term,
Yeah.
year to year, and I don't really get like a long term vision of success and progress and growth from them compared to some of the other top teams in the league. So it will be interesting to see
Yeah.
how they build on this season, if they just scrap it again and start from anew, or if they say, no, there are some good things. Let's build on it. Let's keep a core of these players and then just improve on it.
Yeah, yeah, it would be an interesting next couple of months, I think, to see where they go because they were prolific. Like as soon as things opened up, they were signing players left, right, and centre last year.
Yeah, so don't be surprised if within 2 weeks' time we're already getting player signings from
Yeah.
from Valor, if not by early January. But that's it for Valor. Let's move on now to the other V team and the other VFC team
Yeah.
in Vancouver FC, the BC side, the team that I covered this season. And yeah, similar to Valor, I didn't get to celebrate all that much going to Willoughby Stadium. At the beginning, I did, but towards the rest of the season, it wasn't as fruitful a time going to cover them live. Once again, starting with the stats from the season, they finished 7th place on 30 points. record of 7 wins, 9 draws, 12 losses across all competitions, or across home and away. Home and away, 4 wins, 4 draws, 6 losses at home, the worst home record in the entirety of the CPL. 3 wins, 5 draws, and 6 losses away. So not all that better uh, at home than away, which is again why it's super concerning. Just the difference of one extra draw,
Yeah.
uh, and that's it between home and away. They were last in goals scored with 29. They were tied last with Halifax Wanderers in goals conceded with 43. They did have a quite high top goal scorer, Guero Diaz, finished double digits with 10 goals. Paris G was their top assister, which actually I did not know until I
Yeah,
saw
that's
that Paris
concerning.
G, the center back fullback,
Yeah.
was their top assister with 4. I'm guessing from all the crosses that he likes to put into
Yeah.
the box. Then going into the deeper stats, they were 7th in goals per match. They were 6th in clean sheets. No bit part, and thanks to Callum Irving, who
Yeah.
came in clutch many a time
Mm.
for Vancouver FC. They were last in big chances created, 7th in shots on target per match, 8th in passing success percentage, 8th in interceptions per match, which goes to show again probably some of the issues that they had defensively. They couldn't even
Mm.
intercept the balls that were going into the box
No,
at the
they weren't
at the
aggressive at all after a while. After starting off aggressively at the beginning of the year and going at teams, they were very passive in their defending.
Exactly. And they allowed a lot of balls into their box. And instead
Mm.
of interceptions, they had to rely on saves and blocks
Yeah.
to cover for them, which is not what you want as a defensive plan to be successful in this league or any league for that matter. They were 6th in tackles per match, again, showing their passivity. They were 3rd in clearances. So that does show that once they were able to get onto the ball, they were just hoofing it anyway to clear people. 2nd in penalties conceded, similar again to Valour. Interesting to see that the 2 teams that are at the bottom of the table conceded the most penalties,
Yeah.
and were also top 2 in fouls per match because Vancouver FC were 2nd in fouls per match, while
Mm.
also unsurprisingly 1st in saves per match.
Yeah.
Once again, Callum Irving broke the CPL record for most saves in the season. So looking at that overall in the stats, you can very much see again, it sort of tells a similar story to what we saw with our eyes. In that Vancouver FC spent a lot of time without the ball,
Mhm.
and yeah, a lot of the time not being able to do good without the ball because they weren't even defensively doing all that great. They
Yeah.
had to rely, like I mentioned, on blocks and saves to stop the goals from going in. But then also they had a lot of issues, obviously, in scoring and in creating
Mm.
chances. It felt very stale after the first few weeks in Vancouver FC in terms of creating goals, and quite quickly they got found out in terms of their style of play, and so it was quite difficult for Vancouver FC to gain any momentum, especially because they started to shoot themselves in the foot more often than not in games, and then it became an issue of mentality and psychological, and it became just at a certain point as basically a fight for survival in the
Mm.
playoffs, which was a fight that they in the end lost in the very last few weeks of the season, which was heartbreaking and very frustrating for fans and even for people covering it, like
Yeah.
myself. Before I jump into all of the things that I got to say negative about
Yeah.
Vancouver FC, talk about what went right with Vancouver FC this season, because there were, again, similar to Valor, there were some shining moments from
Yeah.
Vancouver
Callum
FC.
Irving.
Yeah, Callum Irving, obviously massive one. He was clutch. He got a shout for goalkeeper of the year. He finished behind
Mm.
Emil Gazdov, but still, the fact that he was there as one of the keepers, that the only player that was nominated that was not from a playoff team,
Yeah.
shows how crucial he was for Vancouver FC, broke many records, probably unwanted records. I did have that conversation with him at the awards ceremony in Calgary, where he was happy to be nominated, but he wished he was nominated for better reasons
Yeah.
rather than just because he had to bail out his team multiple times. It's not very much a record that you want to boast that you made the most saves in the season, especially as the captain of the
Yeah.
team, than someone that wants to put the club forward and the team forward ahead of himself. Yeah, definitely not the one you want to see. But the fact that he was able to do that is still a highlight, because if
Yeah.
he wasn't, then we're talking about a really poor season
Yeah.
from Vancouver C, where it could have been much, much worse, and they could have been out of the playoff picture much, much earlier than where they were. Another specific player that I want to highlight is also Grady McDonald, the very young 16-year-old, I think turning 17 early in the next year. Bright young prospect, the Canadian Irish dual national, really looks like the real deal for
Mm.
Vancouver FC, and even at the international level when he does go, he seems to be an integral part of the youth system in Ireland. He's got great tenacity, loves a tackle, is full of
Yeah.
energy as he should as a young lad. And but it's not just that he's has bags of energy. He also has a really good IQ for it. He knows when to tackle. He knows what spaces to occupy defensively, even on the ball. He knows how to keep the play going and to kind of recycle the ball and everything in the midfield. And he has plenty of potential.
Yeah.
He's a player that's, will, if he's not leaving this season, he will likely not be here next season, or at the end of next season, because he's definitely a prospect a lot of people have their eyes on. Part of the Whitecaps system, probably one of the Whitecaps' gems of the youth system that was prized away by Vancouver FC. He's someone that I think, already has interest from abroad. I remember Rob Friend sort of revealed that at the end of season conference, that he was fielding offers for some of the young players that you would imagine is great at McDonald. And
Yeah.
just when he did come on, when he did have those appearances, didn't really look out of place, which
Uh,
is again incredible considering that he's 16 years old, playing in a men's league.
mm.
Goes to show how bright this kid's future is. And yeah, I feel like for Vancouver fans, it's enjoy him while he lasts, because he probably won't stick around long.
Yeah. Yeah, he was really, yeah, really interesting to see how he came in. Lots of chat about him before he's even taken to the field for Vancouver, and it got his slowly brought through and given those opportunities, and then yeah, just felt like part of the furniture.
Yeah, genuinely. Um, I guess looking at their recruitment at the beginning of the season, that obviously was something that was a big plus in terms of marketing. They had the BC homecoming party. They brought a lot more depth in the team at the beginning of the season. Some more maturity in some of the players, and on paper they built a really, really good squad to compete, and it looked that way for the first quarter to third of the season. In the first quarter to third of the season, they looked like not only playoff contenders, but potentially outside shouts for, the top two spots. That's how good they were playing in the first 4 to 6 weeks of the season. But then obviously things started to kind of go downhill. They did have some other notable highlights throughout the season in terms of, they had a dominance on the Salish She Derby against Pacific. They won three
Yeah.
out of four matches. They went, I think, before their big loss, the 3-0. In the last one, they win, I think, 7 games unbeaten against
Mm.
Pacific. I think it was 6 or 7 games unbeaten against Pacific. They also went undefeated against Forge in Hamilton. The only team to be able to boast that in the CPL. They got 1 win and 1 draw at Tim Hortons Field. And then, from a more club perspective, they had the CPL on tour game in Kelowna, which was a resounding success for the league and for the club. And it was a sellout. A lot of people really enjoyed it. It kind of showed the league the prospects of maybe having a team in Kelowna. They also had the incredible missing Messi marketing plan that they had after it was announced that Messi wasn't coming to Whitecaps game. The whole like trade in your ticket, get a free ticket thing. That was
Yeah.
genius. That was really, really well done. And then last but not least, their cherry blossoms kit was
Yeah,
gorgeous.
Vancouver and Valour did well on kits this year. Cherry
Yeah,
Blossom was really good, and yeah, the away kit for Valour, the second kit was really nice.
yeah. So silver linings, some nice things, some nice things. As you can tell, we kind of had to scrape a little bit for
Mm.
for some of the highlights. But now let's talk about the lowlights and the things that went wrong. Not gonna spend too much time on this because we don't want this to be another 2-hour episode. Um, but if you want a more in-depth look at what specifically my opinions are, I wrote a piece for Northern Tribune about exactly what went wrong with Vancouver FC, and it was like somewhere like north of 2,000 words. So if you want
Yeah.
like a more detailed look at that, you can. But just looking at quickly some of the big points of Vancouver FC season, what went wrong. I mean, the biggest one was obviously the home form. Worst
Yeah.
home form in the season, only 4 wins in 14 matches is unacceptable. Case in point, that's where you're supposed to be the strongest. It's where you're supposed to have a fortress. It's where you're supposed to make the most points on average. And they weren't able to do that. Again, they started really well with those 2 home wins against Valour and Halifax, admittedly a Valor side that just basically met
Mm.
and didn't even have time to play at home. A Halifax side that's, as we came to know, was struggling to adapt to a new style and struggled throughout the
Yeah.
season to be able to play at that level. So I think now, looking back, those wins maybe weren't as impressive as they were at the time, but they started well at home.
Yeah.
And then quickly it just starts to all fall apart and almost incredulously falling apart. It felt like even in the games where you would expect them to do better, they were unable to, because the only 2 games after the first 2 games of Valor and Halifax that they were able to win were the 2 games against Pacific, where obviously more than just the points were important.
Mm.
It was bragging rights. It was the occasion. It was the rivalry that I think kind of kicked the players into gear. But outside of that, it was really, really disappointing at home. And as someone that was there watching, it kind of
Enduring.
felt, yeah, it kind of just felt like a very slow going car crash
Yeah.
at times, because either there was just ridiculous mistakes at the beginning or just a complete lack of composure towards the end that began costing them a lot. And just when you look at it overall, the way that they prepared and went about for those home games, it clearly didn't work. And it clearly went deeper than just, oh, we got to fix some tactical things. It clearly became a very serious psychological issue for the players.
Yeah, it didn't seem to be a particularly happy camp from the outside looking in. The home form, like you mentioned, was terrible. And you say making it a fortress, it just looked emptier and emptier as the season went on. And to Valor's credit, I mean, I don't know if I'm right, but they look like their home attendances, which had been awful for years, were starting to get a little, like, it looked like more people were turning up as they hit that little run of games. But on the flip side of Vancouver, it just looked like people were, from the TV. I know it's difficult to see because there's a whole stand you can't see, just like in Ottawa mostly, and it just seemed like they were really struggling to get people down and interested. And I think, I mean, he talks about getting all these BC players back, and it was a good sort of marketing thing to start the year off and making it like the the BC boys are all back and we're going to have a big season with people who care about Vancouver. And I know there was on paper you saying like, yeah, it was exciting to see, like on paper they looked like a really good outfit, but looking back in hindsight now, as I look back at some of the players you've got, I think one of the biggest issues is, especially mostly going off the fact that Paris G is that has the most assists. If you look at that forward line, that like taking out the centre forwards, you've got by the end of it, Austin Ricci, Cantav, Verhoeven, Fisk, Saluf, Tahid, Bitar, Elijah Barr was in there getting played forward. None of them. You don't have three players that you go, well, they're the starters, and then there's these other players competing. I think looking back, possibly is the fact that everyone's in competition for that. There's no standouts in that team that people are fighting to take the position, and maybe that became very hard to manage because players aren't performing particularly well. Like Cantav and Fisk, for example, coming down from Cavalry, they're not getting in those teams, so they've come down. They've dropped, in theory, they've dropped down to Vancouver, thinking, right now I'm going to make sure I get my place in this team. But there are other players in there that are roughly as good, but no one's going in going, right, you're the starter and you're the player. I'm going to try and take your place by working hard. As you go into it, it's like, well, who's playing here? Like we'll all work hard. Like, and I think Ashton Gotby, who I think we've spoken about a few times, many times this season, how sometimes his man management skills aren't the best in Vancouver this year. I think that was something which we didn't realize at first, but maybe looking back at it, that was something that was set up to be a really huge challenge for him that he wasn't able to deal with.
Yeah, because on paper it looked like a fantastic thing for the club, in terms of the competition always kind of brings out the best in players because it pushes them to go that extra mile, to work extra hard and to kick into a new gear to keep their place. But obviously that must be maintained. Like that can't just happen in a vacuum. That has to be maintained in a positive working environment where things are very clearly understood and like the players and the coach and management are all on the same page, and it's where those kind of dynamics are able to flourish. And it feels like that wasn't the case for Vancouver FC. It feels like I know behind closed doors there's a lot of locker room drama, a lot that I am not privy to talk about, but there was plenty of locker room drama. There was a lot of players being frozen out with little to no explanation. You look at David Norman Jr., you look at like Noel Verhoeven, you look at Anthony White, kind of just dropped off the face of the earth after a little while. And then it kind of became a problem of he started to rely on the same players, even though the performances weren't working well, rely on the same players and not really have a plan B or not really have that flexibility to put new players in, just kind of throwing the same thing at the wall, hoping at some point it sticks with some of the players. And obviously the players, because like you mentioned, a lot of players were probably promised the ability to compete because every position was up for grabs.
That's the thing I'm curious, like for you, like picking the player completely at random, like Ben, let's go with Ben Fisk just because he's from BC. He's come down from Cavalry. It's like, well, okay. He's either being sold, right, you're dropping down because we are a small newer team. Like we need your experience, get in there and play, be a big part of our team. Or he's just being told, come down, we want someone like you'll be close to home. Like, so either way, whatever that is, whatever he's sold on, either that's completely the wrong message or it's a complete false message almost. If you think about what he's being promised, he would be a starter because they need his experience. That was never going to be the case, I don't think. And if he's just brought in just because we want to get in as many BC players, and this, I'm only picking him as a random example. There's plenty on here that you can
Hmm.
use the same example for. If he has just brought in as a BC player, like what is the point?
Yeah, especially because he barely played this
Mm,
season, Ben Fisk. Like he started off, and then when things started to go off, he sort of just again kind of dropped off the face of the earth. The only reason why I know more about him than the likes of Verhoeven or Anthony White or David Nolan Jr. is because he started to take up roles in the front office. He started to
mm,
actually work at the club, which is something that he was inspired by. I think Charlie Trafford at Cavalry to start of you know work within the club as well as being a player at the
mm.
club. But yeah, it's kind of confusing why a lot of these players were signed beyond marketing reasons.
Yeah, Zach Clayton,
And
another one, like exact same position, pretty much. Like, what's going on there?
exactly. And
Because
so
Cantab and Bitar were good last year.
yeah. And so it's kind of like, okay, you got these players for depth. You got these players to
Mm,
provide competition. But you never really call upon them,
mm.
then what was the point? Just the idea of competition, the threat
Yeah,
of losing
exactly.
place,
Yeah.
but not actually putting it in place.
Mm,
These are things that are sort of confusing that I think play into why there was so much locker room drama, why there was so much animosity between some players and the coach. And especially again, the fact that he never really strayed away from making wholesale changes, giving other players real opportunities more than just a 20-minute cameo.
mm.
I think it all kind of played into the issues, the mentality issues that were prevalent in the team this season. And, that was, I mean, that was overall, while the home form was kind of like the sort of, uh, the example of it, the thing that came into fruition from it, the overarching issue was just the mentality at
Yeah.
Vancouver FC. It was how many times did they have those lapses of judgment where they pass the ball to an opposition player? I think of Rocco Romeo passing it to David Chouanier against Forge FC in the first 5 minutes. When they conceded like 3 goals from set pieces inside his first 10 minutes, 3 weeks in a row. There are these little periods where they just were just losing
Mm.
because of these simple mistakes that you wouldn't expect professional teams to make, compounded by the fact that the coach is calling them out. I remember when Gottby, I forget after which game, said these are kindergarten level mistakes. We're like,
Yeah.
ouch. I mean, you're not exactly wrong, but the exaggeration hurts,
Mm.
especially towards your players. As a coach, some coaches decide that I'm not going to defend the players to defend the players. I'm going to call them out when they want to when I want to call them out. That's a kind of coaching style that a lot of coaches do. I find historically in the modern game that doesn't really go well. You
No.
know, it reminds me of what was a Southampton manager? Um,
God, which one we keep going through?
it
Hasenhüttl.
was like no, it was like Nathan
Oh,
Ferguson,
Nathan Jones. Oh,
Nathan
yeah.
Jones. That's what that
Have
was.
you
What
heard his
Nathan.
latest one? Just he's at Charlton now, and at one point just said, "Well, if the fans want to pick, I'll take the and want to tell me how to do my job. I'll take my wage. They can do it for me." All right.
That yeah.
Lost his
So
mind, that one.
exactly, an example of a coach that does that probably isn't fantastic. Um, so I feel like with like Gottby kind of not really covering for the players,
Mm,
calling them out. Again, some players might respond to that well. A lot of players will probably not respond to that
yeah.
too well. And then the mentality kind of becomes more and more frayed, and kind of these problems start to leak out onto the fields, and then more mistakes happen and more losses occur, and then it becomes this kind of like positive feedback loop in a negative way,
Yeah.
and then you just have what eventually happened, which was Vancouver FC that for again 25 out of 28 weeks
We're
were
in
inside the
it.
playoff places, end up missing the playoffs.
Mm,
And yeah, it's a lot of things that went into the failures that were
yeah.
that was in 2024. One more thing I want to bring up before we move on is a perfect encapsulation of the season is that Moses Dyer and Monsaluf trade,
Yeah.
because initially when that
Really
trade
well.
happened, I was like, this is best for both parties. They kind
Mm.
of fit what they need. Vancouver needed a more kind of impactful, creative player. Pacific FC needed goals at that time. It made perfect sense. But aside from Salouf's game winner against Valour, they didn't really do all that much.
No, just
Meanwhile,
added to the 15-man depth chart of attacking midfielders.
genuinely, genuinely. Meanwhile, you look at Moses Dyer and the impact that he had, and
Yeah,
he almost single-handedly brought Pacific out from the bottom of the table and clawed them back into those playoff spots,
yeah,
usurping his parent club in
exactly.
Vancouver FC. So,
Taking that into account, then, mate, like you talked about the mentality, you talked about the decisions on the trade, you talked about like how he's called out players and like the former recruitment and jump ahead a little bit now, but like what they need to do in 2025. I mean, I've said it. I can't imagine. I don't think he should be back next year. Is that one of the things they need to do? Find a new manager?
I think it's a thing that they arguably should do. I
Mm,
do not think it's a thing they will do.
no.
From the impression I got at the end of the season, at the end of season availability, and from what I heard from within the club, it very much feels like Goppy is here as long as he wants to situation, which I know a
This
lot of
isn't the first.
fans.
I mean, 2 seasons in, and at both years, players have left quite unhappily.
Yes, I know. It's a little bit of an interesting decision to say the least. I know
Mhm.
a lot of Vancouver FC fans listening might not be happy with that. But it's the reality. I feel like unless something goes woefully bad for
Mm,
Vancouver FC, where it becomes scandalous to keep
yeah.
him in the position, I think he's going to stay as the head coach. I think in
Mm.
an ideal world, maybe you put him as like a sporting director, and you bring in another coach to actually deal with directly with the players in
Yeah,
a
he needs someone
key.
that he needs more a better, possibly a better assistant that's a people person. It doesn't have to
Yes,
don't need to do anything on the training field. Don't do anything in the in game. Just keep people happy.
yeah, because I feel like it Guppy's about the vision, about the young
Yeah.
players, about all of this stuff, right? About, like I mentioned in the article, becoming this football factory of bringing all the
Mm,
top young prospects in BC and in Canada through it. All these long term plans, fantastic. Keep them around for that, but for the short term and for the on field stuff, maybe bring in a new coach, whether it's an assistant or full time, and you move Guppy to a different position. That is probably ideally what I would want for
mm,
Vancouver FC, because I do think definitely Afshin has a place at Vancouver FC. Just don't know, given the history and given the outgoings,
mm,
if head coach is exactly what you were where you want him to be.
mm,
Um, but nevertheless, yeah, talking about what they need in 2025, they will 99% keep Afshin Guppy on. So what do they need to succeed with him still at the helm? I think in terms of like not a quick fix, but in terms of like an easy spot to improve, is they need an experienced center back to
yeah.
pair alongside, like a Rocco Romeo, because the pair of NU and Rocco Romeo is still only 24,
Mm,
right? Like he's still young. The only reason why we see him as the mature center back is because he was originally paired alongside 18, 19, and 20-year olds.
yeah.
So he's still like a young center back. If you bring in like a 28, 29, 30, 31-year-old center back that is a seasoned veteran that has plenty of experience, especially experience winning games, winning titles, winning championships,
Mm,
that will help Rocco directly, but the team as a whole, because you need that leader on the pitch, not in the goal, on the actual pitch,
mm,
to kind of both figuratively and literally grab these players by the scruff of the necks and be like, focus. Stop panicking. Stop doing whatever you want to do. Stick to the plan. We got this. Because I feel like a lot of times that's what was missing from Vancouver. See, somebody to really calm things down, allow people to take a breather, allow people to kind of refocus and get back into the game. Uh, Overall, just a leader for mentality reasons to
Yeah,
help out.
I
I think
agree on that
that's
because when you look at Romeo, like you say, he's young, he's only 24, but if he'd had those last season and this season with an experienced player, then he would be like he would have had that opportunity to grow. I think his development has been completely stunted by making him the leader at such a like at 22 for these 2 seasons. He should be now taking the role next season for the first time as being like, okay, I'm the leader. We can bring up Anthony White, and we're in this good position where we're comfortable. Like it's a terrible example because like forge, but when Owolabi Belewu comes in at centre back alongside Ashinoda Johnson, like like okay, you're in a position where you can grow and develop as a young centre back. But Rocco Romeo has just been left out to dry too much that it's just held him back. Like, and he's done some good bits, but I just think there's a much better player in there than he's been allowed to become.
Yeah, and I think a good example is looking at Pacific with Amir Didic and Thomas Meyer,
Mm,
where sort of like Amir Didic was the experienced center back, and Thomas Meyer was able to perform well alongside him because he was the experienced center back, and Mergier was sort of the prospect, the Padawan, the person that was learning from it. Didic leaves, and Mergier, sort of becomes the big dog. Obviously, Ali and Dum was supposed to replace Didic to be
mm,
the experienced center back. He got, unfortunately, the long-standing injury, but allowed TMG to kind of step into that role. And it felt like at that point in his development, he was ready to step into
yeah,
that role
he's ready
for
to lead.
Pacific, and to ready to lead, and he was, because even when he was paired alongside Quintana, when he was paired
Whoever
alongside
anyone.
Cesare,
Yeah,
even Eric Lajeunesse,
Sean
like he
Young's gone
looked
in.
like, yeah, exactly, like he looked like the leader in that because he was able to
Mm,
be given that time to develop
yeah,
and to be able to be that kind of player that rounded out the defense in an experienced manner. I think you're right in that Rocco Romeo didn't have that luxury. He was kind of
no,
thrown into the deep end and say be like, you got to learn to swim because you got to be that guy for us,
mm,
and wasn't able to. I think now, if they bring somebody in a shorter amount of time, he'll be able to become that. I think within a
yeah,
season or
probably, but
two, with
yeah,
experienced center back, he'll be able to be that more of that finished product at like 26, 27. But definitely needs to happen sooner rather than later. Not only for
mm,
him, but for Vancouver FC in
yeah,
general, because conceding 43 goals in 28 matches is
mm,
not a great record, even though
no,
it is better than last season, which I think was 50 goals in, in the season. So definitely an improvement, but
yeah,
maybe not as much as you wanted. But on a whole, I think, yeah, the mentality needs to be better overall from the players. They not only in terms of the player personnel of bringing in players with better mentality, but as a club, the whole atmosphere of the club needs to be healthier for the players to succeed, because I feel like sometimes it felt, even as someone that was sort of on the outside, sort of on the inside, it kind of felt like there was a lot of you against me thing, or like my
mm,
way or the highway kind of things that I understand has some places in certain environments, but I feel like in a modern day soccer team, you can't really allow that. It's sort of like team first. We're doing it together. It's us against the world. It's kind of like as a unit,
mm,
we kind of take care of each other kind of thing. I feel like there wasn't enough of
mm,
that. And as on a whole level with the club, I feel like just improving that atmosphere, obviously bringing some key pieces in, um, and maybe bettering the style of coaching that Afshangami has, where he kind of takes a different approach to the man management,
Okay.
might help them out a bit more. As well, with one more thing I wanted to mention is a better style of play on the pitch, because that was something that I talked about at length throughout the season. It felt
Mm.
like I had no idea what the style of play was
No.
for
Yeah,
Vancouver
not at all.
FC,
Yeah, it's impossible to
because
tell.
when they had a style of play, it was very transitional, counter attack, fast pace. But as soon as teams found that out, they had no plan B.
Mm.
They weren't a team that was able to hold on to possession. They weren't a team that was able to unlock defenses as soon as they sat deep. And they were very susceptible to counterattacks because they weren't trained for
Yeah.
that. And
That's the
so very
big difference. Like when you look at Valour and Vancouver, Valour they seem set on what they wanted to be by the end of the season. Yeah, it's not working. Like it's not always working, but it looked like they're okay. This is what we're going to be, and if that continues going in next season, seems to be at least puts them at a good on a good sort of firm footing to try and improve. Like whether or not they finish bottom next year again, like could well happen. But if they do stick with that philosophy, it's already ingrained in some of these players. Whereas Vancouver are going to go into next season, it's like, well, so what are we? And that's when that is the question. Like when that's the first question. Like if someone asks when they're being interviewed and things like that, when they're asked the question like what is Vancouver FC, what is your style of play, I don't think they can answer it, and that doesn't help the atmosphere in the club. And
no,
all these
exactly.
other things go off from it, don't they?
Yeah, it all contributes to
Mm,
this issue of the atmosphere, because without a clear style of play, without a clear plan and this clear philosophy, players don't really know what they should do, what they should aspire
mm,
to do beyond just working hard on the pitch, right?
yeah.
They don't have a clear idea of what the spirit of the team is on the field. And as humans, we don't like the unknown. We're afraid of the unknown, and to be able to maybe rock up to work and be like, I have no idea what's on my agenda today. Some people might thrive on
That's
that.
my
A
day
lot
every
of
day.
people do not. Yeah, very fair.
That's why I support Valor.
Yeah. So some people can definitely do that. I think a lot of people cannot, and it becomes very stressful and does
Yeah.
not contribute again to a healthy work environment. So I think you know all of this in general is things that Vancouver FC need to improve on. Can
Yeah.
they do it in such a short amount of time? Who knows?
I
But
think we
they
both
need
need
to.
to remember, like, when the new season comes around and we see the new team sheet going into the year, like who's in the squad, we have to remember with Vancouver, don't get too excited next year. Just wait till we see like a few weeks in, because
Yeah,
God knows.
yeah. I think I've learned my lesson
Yeah,
from this season, that no matter how good it looks on paper, you never
yeah.
know how it's
Gotta
gonna be
wait,
on
give them 2
grass.
months before giving any set, like, yes, this is what I believe in this team.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Reserve opinions. Reserve opinions. But yeah, one of the things that you said before we close up is obviously like, who are we going to be? What are we going to be next season? And that again kind of ties into what the personnel is going to be. So
Mm,
similar to Valor, I'm going to quickly list off the roster details from Vancouver FC, because they also just confirmed it today at the time of recording, and they have more players than Valor do in terms of guaranteed contracts. They have 10, double would Valor
really got a
have.
team there.
Yeah, they almost a full team, they can field. They have Elijah Ba, Paris G, David Norman Jr. on guaranteed contracts. I wonder how that David Norman Jr. shout is going to go, given that he got pretty much frozen out in the season.
Mm,
Midfielders Ben Fisk, same question. Mikael Cantav, Vasco Fry, Grady McDonald, TJ Tahid, and forward Jose Navarro, who a lot of people forgot about, and I'm not surprised why. Um, Alejandro Diaz also remains until June 30th, 2025, because that's where his extension loan
mm.
ends from Norway's Sogndal Football Club. They do have options for both keepers, Nico Giannopoulos and Callum Irving. Callum Irving, it seems like,
You reckon they'll keep him around?
yeah, I think so. I think he's done just enough to maybe earn a
He had a
contract.
couple of good games, didn't
Yeah, a
he?
few. But Nico is going to be an interesting one, given that he didn't
Mm.
play a wink, and
No.
he probably was looking to play at least a little bit of soccer
Yeah, it's a bit
in this
hard. Yeah, he's very
CPL.
much in that difficult. I mean, he's made 20 saves this last week and a half. So I can see
Kind of
why
hard.
I'm not getting in. But
Exactly. I do think he's involved coaching with the U19s as well, so
yeah, okay.
uh, it'll be interesting to see if he does stick around beyond this season. They also have options for Matteo Campagna, Caden Chung, Anthony White, James Cameron, Tyler Crawford, and midfielders Gabby Bitar, Renan Garcia, Olivier Romans, and Zach Verhoeven. Again, kind of quite a few players there that were frozen out or barely featured. That'll be interesting to
Mm,
see how they go on. Tyler Crawford got that really bad season-ending injury, so we'll see how he goes on in terms of fitness if they keep him on because of it. I think Gabby Bitar, you probably will want to come back. Caden Chung, you probably want him to come back. James
mm,
Cameron, the same if he doesn't get moved on to a bigger club. Even Robbins, I think you probably want to come. You want him to come back, even if it is more of a depth piece.
mm.
And then in terms of expired contracts, Alan Enyu's loan from Leganes B is done. Don't know. We'll see him come back.
Yeah, I wouldn't.
Joey Buchanan's developmental contract ends. I think he only featured for the U19, so I have no idea what's going to happen with him. Sebastian Jakowski's CPLU sports contract is up. Barely saw him featured. Don't really expect him to come back at
No.
all for Vancouver FC as well. Rocco Romeo is out of contract without an option, so probably going to be one of the main priorities as well to find a new contract for him because he's a fan favorite. I can't imagine him wanting to leave
Mm.
Vancouver FC. Austin Ritchie, very short career. I think he's not going to continue. The fact that his major highlight with the club is that miss against Halifax Wanderers with the open goal,
Mm.
probably says enough about what holds from him being
Yeah,
Vancouver.
if you're fighting to bring Ricci back, then you're not going to be a playoff team next year.
Exactly.
That's my hot take.
Fair enough. And then Moses Dyer. Don't think he's gonna be a welcome figure at
Mm,
Vancouver FC, and I don't think that he wants to come back very much either, from what I've heard
yeah.
behind the scenes. So yeah, we'll be surprised if he comes back. Probably, I'd say he's probably gonna move to Pacific FC. But if he doesn't go to Pacific FC, then he'll probably move abroad. I don't imagine him wanting to stay in Langley
No.
after this season. But all of those will expire on December 31st, 2024. So, yeah, it'll be interesting to see what this kind of team will be. They still have that spine, I guess, of the team, especially if you include the ones that they're probably definitely going to resign, like Irving and Chung, Cameron,
Mm.
Bitar, but it also gives them more space to kind of bring more players in. I'm hoping that if they do bring more players in, they actually play those players and make it more worthwhile for the players, especially
Mm.
those that do not start. Um, but we'll see. I'm very interested to see what this offseason becomes for Vancouver FC because I'm in a very different mindset from what I was in last season, where I was like, they barely had a competitive team in 2023. I'm really excited to see what they bring to 2024 in terms of
Mm.
actually recruiting a competitive team. Now going to 2025, I'm like, okay, you had a competitive team, you fumbled it. How are you gonna improve it? Not even just by player signings, but as a club as a whole. Player signings to a degree, they can be fantastic. They can be super impactful. But if the issues that you have run deeper than the team and deeper than the staff and go all throughout the club, player signings become just band-aids on massive cracks.
Mm.
They kind of paper over the bigger issues. So yeah, I'm going to be very, very interested to see what happens with Vancouver FC in this offseason because I have to feel that it's going to be a make or break year for Vancouver FC in season 3 in terms of establishing themselves as a top CPL side in the league. But because by year 3, don't really have that many excuses anymore compared to year 1 when they were barely a team.
Yeah, well, Vanny's free now, isn't he? If he doesn't fancy moving.
Yeah, I don't know if he'll take that pay cut. I'll be honest. I don't know if he'll take that pay cut. But,
might just be cozy, comfy at home though. So
yeah, very true. Very true. Very true. Very true. But that is it for the Vancouver FC season roundup, and that is it for today's episode. Thank you so much for listening. This is part 1 of a 4-part recap series that we will be doing for the rest of the month. Make sure to follow us once again on all of our socials to let us know your thoughts on this week's episodes and all of the episodes as well from this series to see, if you agree with our analysis, if you agree with some of the things that we think need to change in the clubs, especially starting from the bottom. There will be a lot of things that need to change, and let us know what you think needs to change as well. But until next time, I'm Felipe Vallejo.
And I'm Mike Rice.
And this has been Coast to Coast FC, signing out.